It was my 34th birthday, and the house was full of people I loved. Somewhere between the cake and the second round of laughter, Grace stepped close to me, quieter than the room around her. She reached for my hand and pressed something into my palm, closing my fingers over it before anyone else could turn and look. A small pink envelope, sealed with wax. Her mouth came near my ear. "Happy birthday, Ryan," she said. "Don't open it here." I felt the seal push against my skin, a small red heart, and for a moment every sound in the room drifted far away. My name is Ryan Doyle, and I am 34 years old. I bind and restore books for a living, in a narrow shop in Savannah with my name painted small on the window. I live in the 2 rooms above it, alone, and I have for a while now. 3 years ago my marriage ended. There were no children, no house to divide, only a quiet apartment and the slow work of learning to like the silence. Most days, I did. The smell of old paper and leather glue had become a kind of company, and the small, exact motions of the work, the needle through the signatures, the press coming down on a fresh spine, gave my hours a shape I could trust. I told myself that was enough, and for a long stretch it very nearly was. My younger sister, Kate, is a travel nurse, which means she is usually 3 states away when the good and the bad things happen. She had planned this whole birthday from a hotel room somewhere in the middle of the country, over the phone, with the stubbornness she brings to everything. She ordered the cake, invited the people, and then, 4 days before, she got stuck on an assignment out of state and could not fly home. She was not going to let the night fall apart, though, so she called in the one person she trusted to hold it together. That person was Grace. Grace Bellamy has been my sister's best friend for more than 12 years. I have known her almost that long, which is a strange thing to say about someone and still feel like you are only now meeting them. She runs a small letterpress studio a few blocks from my shop, a place called Marigold Press, where she prints wedding invitations and cards and little runs of poetry for people who still like the weight of real paper. Her work is careful and warm, the kind of thing people keep in a drawer for years. She seals everything she makes with a stamp of red wax pressed into the shape of a heart. If you have ever received something from Grace, then you have held that little heart in your hand. Neither did I. She arrived early that night, before anyone else, carrying the cake Kate had ordered. That was the reason she came, and it was a true reason. Kate needed someone to bring the cake and stand in for her, and Grace had offered right away, before Kate had even finished asking. On the surface, all of it made perfect sense. I know now why she offered so quickly. I did not know then. I remember she set the cake down carefully on the counter and her hands were not quite steady. I thought maybe she was tired or nervous about hosting a room full of my friends without Kate beside her. I did not think much more about it. I was busy being the man whose birthday it was, shaking hands, refilling glasses, letting people tell me I had not changed a bit, which is the polite lie we tell each other after enough years go by. She had brought something that was not on Kate's list. I did not see her do it. I only felt it later, the moment her hand found mine in the crowd and left that small weight behind. For the rest of the night, the envelope stayed in the inside pocket of my shirt, right over my chest, and I kept touching the edge of it without meaning to. Every time I laughed at someone's joke, every time I cut another slice of cake, my thumb found that folded corner of paper. She had told me not to open it here, and something in the low, careful way she said it made me listen. I did not know what it was. I only knew that the woman who had stood at the quiet edge of my life for over a decade had crossed the room on the night I turned 34 to put something into my hand that no one else was meant to see, and I could not stop thinking about it. Even in a house full of warm light and candles and the people I loved, even with the taste of frosting on my tongue and the sound of my own name in a dozen friendly mouths, some part of me had gone still, the way you do when you sense a night you thought you understood has quietly changed into something else. The party ended the way parties do, in slow waves, until it was just me and a sink full of glasses and that small pink envelope on the counter, still sealed. I picked it up more than once. I held it under the kitchen light and looked at the red heart pressed into the wax. And then I set it back down, because she had asked me not to open it there, and some old, careful part of me decided that there could mean my empty apartment too, that whatever this was deserved better than a man reading it alone at midnight over a pile of dirty dishes. So I waited. I am good at waiting. It is the one skill 3 years of solitude will teach you whether you want it or not. The strange thing is that instead of pulling us apart, that unopened envelope kept pulling us together. Grace started coming by the shop. She had reasons, of course. She always had reasons. She needed a book rebound for a client, an old family Bible with a cracked spine, and she wanted to watch how I did it. Then she needed heavier paper stock than her usual supplier carried, and I happened to have some. Then she just came with 2 coffees and stood in the doorway until I waved her in, and after a while she stopped bothering with reasons at all. I did not question it. I liked it. I liked the way the shop felt with someone else in it, the way the light seemed warmer when there was a second person to see it. She would sit at the end of my bench while I pressed damp pages flat, and she would tell me about a wedding order gone sideways, a bride who wanted gold foil on everything, and I would laugh in a way I had not laughed in a long time. There is a particular smell to my work, damp paper and hide glue and the faint sweetness of beeswax, and after a while, without my noticing when it happened, that smell began to mean her being there. I started going to her, too. Marigold Press has a sound I could listen to for hours, the deep, patient thump of the letterpress coming down, over and over, like a slow heartbeat made of iron. I would bring the coffee this time. I would stand near the machine and watch her feed the paper in, one sheet at a time, her hands sure in a way mine only were with a needle and thread. And on the corner of her work table there was always a coil of red wax and that small brass stamp, the heart worn smooth from years of pressing it into other people's happiness. One afternoon I picked the stamp up and turned it over in my fingers. "How long have you sealed everything with that little heart?" I asked. She did not look at me. She looked at the press instead, feeding in another sheet. "Longer than you'd think," she said. I laughed and set it down and did not hear what she was telling me. That is the part I go back to now, the part I cannot forgive myself for missing. She was answering the real question, the one I had not yet learned to ask, and I heard only a woman being modest about a habit. Something surfaced in my memory around then, a thing I had not thought about in years. 6 years ago, when I was still married, Grace had sent me a birthday card. It came in the mail, which even then was unusual, a small envelope with that same red heart pressed into the wax. Inside was a plain card, a few kind lines, nothing that would make you look twice. I remember I smiled at it and set it on the mantel, the way you do with a nice card from a friend of the family, and then I forgot about it entirely. I remember, too, that my wife found it unbearable. Nicole picked it up, turned it over, made a face at the wax seal. "Who still sends paper cards?" she said, like it was the most embarrassing thing in the world, and by the next morning it was in the trash. I did not fight her on it. It was a card. It did not seem worth a fight, and back then I had learned to save my fights for things that were. I filed it away as exactly that. A card from Grace. My sister's friend, being thoughtful, the way she was thoughtful with everyone. For 6 years, that was the whole of the memory, flat and harmless, tucked in a drawer I never opened. It was only now, standing in her shop with the same red heart cooling on a fresh envelope, that the memory began to turn in the light, to show me a side of itself I had never once thought to look at. I did not let myself finish the thought. It felt presumptuous, even a little arrogant, to imagine that a woman like Grace, steady and kind and wanted by better men than me, had been carrying anything all these years toward a divorced bookbinder who spent his evenings gluing spines back onto other people's stories. So I pushed it down and poured the coffee and told myself I was reading too much into a small piece of wax. But the days kept stacking up, gentle and full. We fell into a rhythm without ever naming it. She knew how I took my coffee. I knew the exact face she made when a print came out crooked, the little downward pull at the corner of her mouth. There were long stretches when neither of us said anything at all, just worked side by side in our separate crafts, and the silence never once felt heavy. I had spent 3 years thinking I preferred to be alone. It turned out I had only never had the right person to be quiet with. Some evenings she would read aloud to me while I worked, from whatever small run of poetry she happened to be printing that week, her voice going soft over the good lines, and I would keep my eyes on the spine in my hands so I would not have to explain the look on my face. Other nights we did not talk at all. She would sort her type back into its case, tile by tile, that small clean rattle of metal, while I stitched, and the two sounds would fold together into something that felt, though I did not have the word for it then, a great deal like being home. I would walk her the few blocks back to her studio afterward, and at her door she would always stop exactly 1 pace away and say good night, and I would walk home lighter than I had any right to feel. And still there were these moments, small ones, that I could not quite explain. I would look up and catch her watching me, and she would glance away half a second too late. I would reach for the same tool she was reaching for, and our hands would come close, and she would pull hers back first, always first. Once, I almost asked her about the letter. I had the words half-formed, the envelope was there in my mind, and she saw it coming somehow, and turned the conversation so smoothly toward gold foil and difficult brides that I lost my nerve entirely and let the moment slide right by. I noticed she stood a certain way around me, never too close, always about a step back, as if there were a line on the floor only she could see, and she had promised someone, long ago, that she would not cross it. For years she had been standing exactly 1 step back from my life, and I had mistaken the distance for ease. I thought it meant she was comfortable, that she simply had that kind of unhurried steadiness. I did not understand that it cost her something to keep that step, that the careful space between us was not carelessness at all, but the most deliberate, most careful thing about her. The envelope stayed on my mantel now, moved up from the kitchen counter, unopened, a small pink shape I looked at every single morning while the coffee brewed. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. The truth is I was afraid, not of what it said, of what it might ask of me, of a version of my life I had quietly stopped believing I was allowed to have. The right moment did not come the way I imagined. It arrived, instead, as most of the disruptions in my life have arrived, wearing my ex-wife's face. It was a small gathering, a housewarming for a couple Kate and I both knew, the kind of thing where half the guests are strangers, and the other half are people you have not seen in years. Grace was there, standing near the kitchen with me, and for once, the step of distance between us had almost closed on its own. I was mid-sentence when I heard a laugh cut across the room that I would know anywhere, bright and a little too loud, pitched to make sure it carried to every corner. Nicole, I had not seen her in 3 years. She looked exactly like herself, which is to say, she filled a room the moment she walked into it and rearranged everyone in it around her. Someone at the party knew someone, and word of my birthday had traveled, and my life, apparently, had traveled along with it. She came straight for me with her arms open, all warmth, as if the last several years of silence had been nothing more than a small misunderstanding we could laugh about together now. "Ryan," she said, holding both my hands in hers, "look at you. I heard it was your birthday. I'm just heartbroken I missed it." I learned later, from a mutual friend, why she had reappeared exactly when she did. Whatever life she had left me for had come apart about 6 months before. The man, the plans, the whole bright future she had traded us in for, all of it, gone. She was between things, and being between things had always frightened her more than anything in the world, and so she had come looking for a familiar door to stand in until she found the next one. Mine. She played the part of the reformed woman beautifully. She told me she had done a lot of thinking lately. She said things about mistakes and growth, and how a person only really understands what they had once they have gone and lost it. It was a good performance, I will give her that. Part of me even wanted to believe it, because it is a lonely thing to be the one who got left, and there is a small, weak comfort in having the person who left come back to tell you they were wrong to go. But every time she leaned in close, I found myself looking past her shoulder for Grace, and that told me something I was not quite ready to say out loud, even to myself. Grace had gone quiet at my side, the easy warmth of a minute before drained clean out of the evening, and then she saw the card. Grace had brought a housewarming gift for the couple, a small framed print she had made herself, and on the back of it, the way she signed everything she ever touched, was that red wax heart. Nicole picked it up off the gift table, turning it over the way she turned everything over, out of habit, looking for the price of it. And I watched her stop. I watched her thumb move slowly across the wax. I watched something click into place behind her eyes, a memory of a card on a mantel 6 years gone, a face she had made, a piece of paper she had dropped in the trash without a second thought. She looked from the seal to Grace, and then to me, and she smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "That's funny," she said, still holding the frame up between us. "I remember this. You used to send Ryan cards with this exact little heart on them, back when we were married." She let that sit in the air a moment. I always did think that was so strange. The room did not go quiet, not at first. But I felt Grace go still beside me, the particular, complete stillness of someone quietly bracing for a blow. Nicole set the frame down and turned to face me, and now she raised her voice, just enough, just so the people nearest us would be sure to catch every word. "You really don't see it, do you?" she said. "You never did. She's been in love with you the whole time, Ryan. The whole time." She sat at my table. She came to our dinners. She smiled at me across my own kitchen, and the entire time she was just waiting for you. She shook her head slowly, performing pity now, dressing cruelty up as concern for an audience. "I always used to wonder why your sister's little friend was forever hanging around. Well, now I know. She was circling. She's been circling you for years. Here is the thing about what Nicole said. The bones of it were true. Grace had loved me during those years. I would learn that soon enough, in Grace's own words. But Nicole took a true thing and bent it into a weapon, the way she could bend anything into a weapon, and she handed me the ugly shape of it and dared me to believe it was the truth. She turned years of quiet restraint into something predatory. She took a woman who had stepped back, again and again and again, precisely so she would never come between me and my marriage, and she painted her as a schemer who had been lying in wait the whole time. And Grace did not defend herself. That was what undid me, standing there. Grace, who could have said 100 true things, who had every right in the world to be furious, simply set her jaw and looked down at the floor and let it happen to her. Her hand closed hard around the strap of her bag, the knuckles going pale, and she pulled her shoulders back and stood very straight, and she said nothing at all. She would not perform her own innocence for a room full of strangers. She would not fight ugliness with more noise. I mistook her silence for guilt. God help me. For a few long seconds I did. Nicole's voice was so certain, so loud, and Grace's silence was so total that some cowardly part of me actually started to do the math that Nicole wanted me to do. I looked at Grace, and I felt doubt move through me like cold water down the back of my neck, and I did not reach for her. She saw that. She saw me hesitate, and that, I think, hurt her more than anything Nicole had said. She lifted her chin, gathered her coat, and walked to the door without a word to anyone in that room. The door did not slam. It closed softly behind her, which was somehow far worse, that gentle little click in a room that had just been torn open. Nicole watched her go with a satisfied tilt of her head, and reached for a glass of wine off the counter and set it down again too hard, the stem ringing sharply against the granite. For a moment, no one seemed to know quite where to look, and a few people found something urgent to study in their drinks. I stood there in the noise she had left behind, and in the ringing quiet after that door clicked shut, I finally began to hear what Grace's silence had been telling me all along. It just took me far too long to hear it. I found her at the shop. Of course I did. Where else does a person go when they have nowhere loud enough to hide their heart except the quietest room they own? The lights were low. The press was still. She was standing at her work table with her back to the door, and when the bell over it rang, she did not turn around right away. She just stopped whatever her hands were doing and stood there, that same careful step of distance holding, even now, even with no one else left in the world to hold it for. "Is it true?" I asked. It was not the question I meant to ask, and I regretted it the very moment it left me, because I could hear in it the shadow of Nicole's version, and I saw Grace's shoulders drop half an inch, as if she had let herself hope, for 1 second, that I would come to her with something better than that. But she answered me anyway. She turned, and she looked at me, and she did not look away. "Yes," she said, not the way she made it sound, but yes. "I've loved you for a long time, Ryan." The room held very still around us. "I never wanted you to know like this," she said. "The truth is, I never really wanted you to know at all. When you married Nicole, I decided it just wasn't mine to feel anymore. So I took it and I put it somewhere and I closed the lid on it. I stepped back. I stayed your sister's friend because that was the only honest place I had left to stand. I didn't circle you. I disappeared, on purpose, so that I would never once be the reason anything went wrong in your life." Her hand pressed flat against the work table, steadying her. "And when it all fell apart anyway, when she left you, I still didn't say a word because you were hurting, and I was not going to be one more person who wanted something from you while you were down on the ground. I thought about all of it then, standing in the smell of ink and warm wax, the step back, the half-second glances. The card 6 years ago that my wife had thrown in the trash, and the woman who had gone right on sending her small red heart out into the world anyway, quietly, year after year, expecting absolutely nothing in return. I thought about how many times she must have stood in a room with Nicole and me together and said nothing, swallowed everything, and gone home alone afterward. How much steadiness that must have taken, week after week, while I moved through my own life never once suspecting the weight she was quietly carrying along beside me. "The letter?" I said. She nodded once, slowly. I took it out. On my way to find her, I had stopped at home and lifted it down from the mantel, where it had sat unopened for weeks, and slipped it into my shirt pocket without ever fully letting myself decide why. The pink paper had gone soft at the edges from being handled. The little red heart was still whole. I broke it with my thumb, and the old wax cracked cleanly down the middle, and I unfolded a page that had been folded so long the creases had worn pale and thin. My own hands were not quite steady, the way hers had not been steady the night she first pressed it into my palm. The date at the top was 6 years old. I read it standing there. I will not put all of it into the world, because some things a man keeps for himself, but it had been written by a younger Grace, in that same careful hand, on the occasion of a birthday 6 years past. It said, in the plainest and the bravest way, everything she had just finished telling me and had never once sent. At the very bottom, she had written that she was not going to give it to me, that she only needed to write it down one time, so that she might finally stop carrying it. And then she had sealed it with her heart and carried it for 6 more years anyway. "He wrote this 6 years ago," I said. My voice did not sound like my own. She nodded. "I never found the right moment," she said. "And then, after a while, I decided the right moment was probably never going to come." She looked at me, as steady as the press coming down. "But your birthday could." I stood in that quiet shop with a 6-year-old letter open in my hands, and I understood, at last, what I had been too slow and too frightened to see. Nicole had called it circling, but a person who is circling wants to take something for themselves. Grace had spent every one of those years making absolutely sure she never took a single thing from me at all. I'd spent 3 years thinking the quiet in my life was loneliness, I told her. It wasn't. It was someone standing very still, right beside me. So she wouldn't crowd me, I crossed the room. I crossed the step she had held for over a decade, the one she had never once allowed herself to close, and I closed it, gently, for the both of us. Nicole's version I left exactly where it belonged, back in that other room, with the woman who could only ever tell a true thing if she could use it to cut someone. I was done, finally, being careful about all the wrong things. I don't want the version she told, I said. I want yours. All of it, for as long as you'll keep handing it to me. Love, when it has waited that long, does not rush. And so we did not rush. We went slowly, on purpose, the way you handle a thing you have wanted far too much to be careless with, now that it is, finally, impossibly, in your hands. There were evenings at my bench and evenings at her press, the two of us working our separate crafts under one warm lamp, passing a single coffee back and forth between us, saying far less than we felt, and somehow understanding every bit of it anyway. I rebound the old books that came in through her clients. She printed the labels and the end papers for the ones I restored. Our two shops, only a few blocks apart on the same quiet street, slowly started to feel like two rooms of the same house. We were careful with Kate, too, in the beginning, though we needn't have bothered. When we finally told her, she just laughed, the particular laugh of a person who has been waiting a long time to stop pretending she did not already know, and she hugged us both and said it was about time one of us finally worked up the nerve. I learned the small things you only learn up close. That she hums, low and tuneless, when a print comes out just right. That she cannot fall asleep at night until every last tool on the table has been wiped down and squared away. That the careful step back she had held for so many years could become, once she finally trusted it, a step forward instead. Her hand finding mine across the workbench without either of us making a single thing of it. The distance that had cost her so much for so long simply closed, a little more with every passing week, until one ordinary afternoon I looked up and realized it was gone entirely, and neither of us could have told you exactly when it went. I stopped keeping the letter out on the mantel. I moved it into the drawer of my workbench instead, where I came across it a dozen times a week, and every single time I did, it steadied me, the small pink shape of a thing she had carried alone for 6 years and did not have to carry alone anymore. Nicole tried, once or twice, to keep the door propped open behind her. A message that needed no reply. A thin reason to call. But the whole story she had built for herself required me to doubt Grace, and I did not doubt Grace anymore. Not for 1 second, and a weapon is only ever a weapon if there is still someone standing there willing to be cut by it. She faded out the way a wrong note fades when you finally stop striking the key. There was no scene, no last confrontation, no door slammed on the way out. She simply became a chapter that had already ended, and I turned the page, and I did not go back and read it again. 1 year later, it was my birthday all over again, 35, this time. Kate flew home for it, actually home this year, with no assignment left to strand her 3 states away, and she stood in my apartment above the shop stringing up the same warm lights we had used the year before, grinning at me the whole time, like a woman who had known exactly how all of this was going to turn out long before I ever did. Maybe she had. I think, in her own quiet way, my little sister had been gently rooting for something like this for a very long time and had simply had the patience to wait me out. The rooms filled up with people I loved. There was a cake, and there were candles, and there was that same soft golden light spilling across the ceiling, and the smell of paper and beeswax that had followed me up the stairs from the shop below. It could have been the very same night as a year before. In every single way that actually mattered, it was not. Because at some point in the evening, somewhere between the cake and the laughter, Grace crossed the room to me, quieter than everyone around her, the way she has always been. She reached for my hand and pressed something into my palm and folded my fingers gently over it, and I felt the shape of a small envelope and the raised, familiar edge of wax against my skin. A little red heart. "Happy birthday, Ryan," she said, close to my ear. "Don't open it here." I laughed then, low and only for her, because I had heard those exact 4 words 1 year before, and they had quietly turned my whole life over on its side, and here they were again, and this time I was not the least bit afraid of what they might mean. This time I already knew. I looked at her, and at the small red heart resting there in my hand, the same red heart she had been sending out quietly into the world for far longer than I had ever bothered to pay attention, and I understood every last bit of what it meant. "Don't open it here," I agreed. And then, because I simply could not help myself, I did. She smiled and let me. Inside was a single line, written in that careful hand I now knew nearly as well as my own. I am not going to tell you what it said. Some things a man keeps. Then I reached into my own pocket, and I took out an envelope of my own making. I had put it together clumsily at my bench over the last week, the folds not quite as clean and true as hers ever were, and I had sealed it the way she sealed everything she loved, with a coil of red wax and that small brass stamp she had let me borrow, pressed just a little crooked into the shape of a heart. I put it in her hand and closed her fingers over it, the very same red heart, only now I knew exactly what it meant, and I had finally learned how to send one back. She held it against her chest and did not open it, and she stood close to me, no step of distance left between us at all anymore, and all around us the warm lights burned and the candles guttered low, and the people we loved went right on laughing. Kate caught my eye from across the room and quietly lifted her glass an inch, just for me. And for once in my life I was not standing quietly off at the edge of my own life, watching it happen to other people. I was in the middle of it, right in the middle of it, exactly where she had always quietly hoped I would end up. I think about that first envelope more than I ever expected I would, about how close I came to never opening it at all, about how a woman I had known for well over a decade had loved me in complete silence, standing one careful step back, asking for nothing, for years, and how in the end it took another person trying to twist that love into something ugly before I finally saw it for what it truly was. Here is what I know now that I did not know then. The loudest voice in the room is almost never the truest one. Nicole could take a real and tender thing and bend it into a weapon, but the thing itself never once changed shape. It was only ever love, patient and quiet and honest, waiting all that time for me to stop being afraid long enough to reach back for it. Real love does not always announce itself. Sometimes it stands off quietly to the side for years, keeping a careful distance, protecting you even from itself. She had been standing one step back from my whole life, and the day I finally turned around, she was still there. So let me ask you 2 things, and I would honestly like to know, if it had been you, would you have opened that letter the very night it was pressed into your hand, or would you have waited the way that I waited? And have you ever failed to see how much someone truly cared for you until somebody else came along and tried to use it to hurt them? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. If this story meant something to you tonight, do me one small favor and give it a like, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. And whatever quiet person may be standing one step back in your own life right now, maybe tonight is the night you finally turn around and see them.